Welcome, everybody. So my name is Beth Fisher-Yoshida, and I am the Program Director of the Master of Science in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution at Columbia University. And during the year, we have these monthly webinars where we invite guests from literally around the world, right? Local and around the world, to come and talk with us about some aspect of peace building, negotiation, conflict resolution, or something core or tangential to the work that we do in the program. So just as a little bit of a heads up about the flow, and then I'll introduce our guest today. The flow of the webinar is that our guest will present for about 30 minutes or so. And while he's doing that, please feel free to write your questions or comments into the Q&A box, which you should see on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then when Matthias is finished, we will answer some questions for you. And then if you are interested in learning more about the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program and about an event that we have coming up next month, please stay on at the end and then after the webinar for more information about that. You'll be joined by our recruiting counselor, David. Okay, so without further ado, I see we have a good audience. I am going to introduce Matthias Schranner with a little bit of an introduction, because otherwise I spend the whole hour introducing Matthias, and we don't want to do that. So I met Matthias more than 5 years ago, and he is deeply steeped in the area of negotiation, probably the more challenging negotiations, the complex negotiations, the ones that are really hard to resolve and hard to understand. He has a very interesting background coming out of the police force, doing undercover work and hostage negotiations as well. So he has a little bit of a different background than me, for sure, and we've managed to work well together. And today he's going to talk about conflict de-escalation. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it over now to Matthias. So please feel free, Matthias, to tell us about your presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very pleased to be here to present my principles for negotiations. And Beth, as you mentioned, mostly about difficult negotiations. I did a lot of difficult negotiations because I'm a former hostage negotiator, and I have learned to de-escalate in situations. Because usually, if you negotiate in your private life or in your business context, then you negotiate, and at the end of the negotiation, you end up in a deadlock situation. As a police negotiator, you start every negotiation in a deadlock, because if you arrive at the scene, then there is, for example, a hostage taker with a gun in his hand, taking a hostage at gunpoint and telling us, I need a getaway car, otherwise I will kill the hostage. So I'm trained to de-escalate negotiations. I'm trained to find a new way out of this deadlock scenario. So you may ask yourself how I became a member of this negotiation task force. I started my career as a police officer and joined the drug enforcement agency. So I worked undercover for 6 years, buying drugs, selling drugs. And after studying, I joined the negotiation task force. We had to negotiate with hostage takers, bank robbers, and suicide attempts. And then I started to translate the knowledge, the experience to your world, to business, to politics. Here you can see our headquarters. We are based in Zurich. We have offices around the world, and we support our clients in difficult negotiations. For example, United Nations in difficult negotiations going on right now. As you can imagine, there are a lot of complex negotiations. We support big companies in M&A deals, for example. And what we try to do, we try to de-escalate situations. And our clients, they call us, they ask us, Matthias, what can we do? We have no idea what to do, because there is no plan B. There is no so-called partner. So I'm sure you know the word partner, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So there is an alternative. Usually you do have an alternative in a negotiation. Usually, let's say in business, you have 2 partners, 3 investors, 3 different suppliers. In a hostage taking, there is no alternative. So in a hostage taking, I need to reach an agreement with a hostage taker. I cannot say, if I don't reach an agreement with this hostage taker, I will talk to another one. So I'm in a so-called dependent situation. And from our perspective, if you're dependent and your negotiation partner is dependent as well, then you're in a negotiation. There's a conflict. You can't go away. You can't walk away. You need to negotiate. And what I would like to show you some examples, some tips about how to de-escalate a situation. However, before you before we talk about de-escalation, we need to understand an escalation because there are several steps which I would like to present. So this is what we have learned in our institute, that there are always 10 steps to the ultimate de-escalation. You possibly know about this model from Friedrich Glasel. We talked about it, and so we did some, we added some elements because from our perspective, nowadays it's slightly different. So let's go through these stairways, and I would like to explain the most important and the most critical phase of a negotiation, because from my perspective, there's only one phase where it's possible to de-escalate a situation. And this phase is called the window of opportunity. And as you know, it's a window, so you can't step in. If you miss it, the window will be closed and then it's over. So because most of our clients, they definitely underestimate the importance of this window of opportunity. They believe if it's open, it will stay open, which is never the case. So a very short introduction to our escalation model. So number one is the so-called interpersonal negotiation. This is what you do in your private life. For example, you negotiate with yourself. Should I communicate? Should I come up with my demand? Or should I just avoid this negotiation? So the interpersonal negotiation is very important because you negotiate with yourself. Should I step into this negotiation, yes or no? If it's very difficult, if it's very complex, then maybe you convince yourself that you shouldn't negotiate at all because it doesn't make sense and because it's so dangerous. And this is what we see very often, that our clients, for example, they do a lot of interpersonal negotiations. So they negotiate with themselves, should they negotiate or not? And very often at the end, we don't have to negotiate. We can avoid this conflict, which is always wrong. Because if you avoid a conflict, it will come back even bigger, even more dangerous, even more difficult. So first step is you negotiate with yourself. Should I negotiate? Should I not? And then you decide, okay, let's negotiate. Let's state my demand. Before you communicate your demand to the other party, you talk to your internal advisors, to your internal friends. In private life, you talk to your friends. Should I really do this? In a business, you talk to the legal department, and big surprise, they will definitely support you. They will tell you, yes, of course, you have to do it. It's really the right approach. Number three, this is a very important one and a very critical one. After talking to your friends, after talking to legal department, you get the impression, I'm right. I'm right. My position is right. And of course, the others are wrong. And if you believe you are right, then you try so hard to convince all the others that they are wrong because you are right, your position is right. If you are right, then you expect that the other parties, that they will understand it, that they are wrong. So you wait for a period of time to say, well, I am right and I communicated already, and they have to understand that they are wrong. As you can imagine, it doesn't work. So expecting surrender, it's a waste of time because they will never come back by saying, okay, now I can see the light, and they will agree. So then you wait, you're right, you wait a little bit, and nothing happened. So you need to take actions. Now you take actions. You start to put something in writing. If you start to write an email, if you start to write a WhatsApp, if you start to do it in writing, then we call it the point of no return. Because if the conflict is in writing, then someone will lose his or her face. And number five, it's very important because after starting with writing actions, then you can't go back anymore. It's the point of no return. Number six, now you are in this critical phase, and now you talk to your friends, you ask for their support. If they support you, then they will become members of the inner circle. If they don't support you, you don't include them in the inner circle anymore because you get the feeling they are against you. And this is very often in business, also in politics, that powerful leaders, they only have yes men around them because they don't allow others to come up with their opinion anymore. So it's friend or enemy, friend or foe. So you force your team members, your board members, your friends into a decision. Are you with me? Yes or no? So now you have your inner circle, you have your yes men around you, you know you're right, you send your demands, they didn't reply. Now it's time for number 7, threats. Now you have to come up with consequences. Now you combine your demands with negative consequences. Now you start with the if sentences. If you don't, we will. The other party, they will never come up with, okay, thank you, now I can see the light. They start with their threats. And then we have threats and counter threats. And we end up in number 8, the power struggle. So from now on, it's not a negotiation anymore. We don't talk to the other party. We talk about the other party. It's a power struggle. So and now we start to increase our power by everything what we can do. We can talk about this later on if you're interested in this topic. So I try to increase my power because I need to win this negotiation. The other one, they have to lose. And before we go to war, there's 1 minute where I think about my position. Should I really do the next step? Because I'm a little bit afraid of the consequences of number 10 about the war, which is in the private life, you're getting divorced. In the business, it's a war, let's say US against China. In politics, it might be a war on the ground. So war is number 10. And before you start a war, you think about it for 1 minute. And this 1 minute is the window of opportunity. What we have learned within the last couple of years, that this window of opportunity, it's the most important element of the de-escalation phase, because in number 9, thinking about the consequences of a war, you rethink your position. So the window of opportunity, now it's open, and now you have to do something. If you don't step in, if you don't de-escalate now, then you end up in a war. So the question is what to do, what should you do in this number 9, if you see the window of opportunity is open. Before we focus on the de-escalation elements, what I believe and what I have learned in my consulting business, that it's not possible to de-escalate before number 9. Because the interpersonal negotiation, I don't see it, because it's interpersonal, they think about it. Internal negotiation, we are not involved as a consultant. Number 3 and number 4, I can't influence my negotiation partner or my clients. So number 5 and number 6, this is where then the conflict is getting visible to other parties, to the public, to the press, and threats. This is where the clients are calling us, like Matthias. We received this very critical threat from our client, from our supplier, from our investor. What should we do? And then they end up in a power struggle, and then it's our responsibility to find a new way. And this ultima ratio number 9, then the window is open. Our client, they are again open-minded for a very short period of time, where we come up with our consulting business. So what are the options? What are possibilities? Number 1 is empathy. So I know you know this word, and you know the importance of empathy. From our perspective, empathy means that you're in this phase number 9. You think about, should I really go to war? Should I really do this? And if you do have if you still have a relationship to the other party, then it's possible to start with empathy, which means we close the laptop, we close all the books, we go back to square one. We talk about the big why. Why are we in this situation right now? What information did we miss? What mistake or what did we wrong in the past? So we close the books, we close the laptops, we look into each other's eyes and say, okay, what went wrong? Let's start from the beginning. Let's start from scratch. Very important. You can only start with empathy if you still have a good relationship. This is mostly not the negotiation team because under or after the power struggle, they are very often get damaged. So you need someone else to start empathy. We could talk about this later on if you're interested in this topic. This is that's the best way from our perspective, the back channel negotiation. So in our consulting business, we work with the so-called crisis negotiation model. So there are always three elements in a negotiation. Number one is the so-called decision maker. Let's say in business, it's the CEO of a company. He or she is making a decision. Decision means this is our target, our maximum target and minimum target. And they formulate the license to negotiate. So the CEO is handing over a license to negotiate, the mandate to negotiate to the negotiation team. In the negotiation team, there are two elements. Number one is the so-called speaking negotiator, the negotiator. And as a negotiator, you are addressing the conflict. You come up with demands, you negotiate. And there's always a second one, the so-called commander. As a commander, you're a non-speaking negotiator. You're in the room, you're listening to the conversation, and you're able to read between the lines. So based on my experience as a former hostage negotiator, if you're under pressure, you're so focused on the conflict that you cannot see options anymore. You're not able to see or to read between the lines because you're so focused on the danger. And this is why you end up in this so-called tunnel vision. Tunnel vision means you're focused, you don't see options anymore. As a negotiator, ending up in a tunnel vision, you're blocked. You're focused on the deadlock. You're focused on the conflict. You cannot de-escalate. This is why we need the second one, the commander. A commander, he or she can read between the lines. They can talk about options. They can summarize common interests. So what we always do, we always send in the team negotiator and commander in a deadlock, in this phase of if the window of opportunity is open, then a commander is talking to the other commander. Not negotiating. They talk about what can we do now. They talk about the framework. They talk about the elements. So what options do we have from now on? They don't discuss numbers. They don't discuss the volume or legal terms. They talk about the framework. So what do we need to do differently to reach an agreement? Back-channel negotiation, it's very important. It's very complicated because there are some principles. Some principles, for example, the number one is it's face-to-face. So it's not possible to do it online. You have to look the other party into the eyes. Number two, you need to say at the beginning, it's off record. You have to say that it's definitely a different element of a negotiation. It should never take place in the same building as the negotiation. So if the negotiation is in your let's say in your headquarters, then you meet the commander of the other side in a Starbucks, for example, for a coffee. And the most important element, all the information you receive, all the information you get in an informal back-channel negotiation, you're not allowed to use it in a formal negotiation. That's very important. So you can't say, but at Starbucks, you told me it's possible. So it's definitely, it's a completely different element of a negotiation, the back-channel negotiation. Number three, mediation. So what is mediation? because most clients, most experts, they have a different understanding of mediation. So what is mediation from our perspective? Mediation is after you walk away, after you have tried all the other options. So after you talked about empathy, after you tried to set up a back channel negotiation. So after trying all the options, then it's time for a mediation, for a mediator to step in. As a mediator, you have to be neutral. If you do have your own interest, then you're not a mediator anymore. As a mediator, you go back and forth between two parties to find the right solution, to find a new option. You need a little bit of creativity. What we see in our consulting business in politics. So I'm Swiss, and Switzerland was really well known for this neutral perspective. Nowadays, it's very critical because, as you know, in the war in Russia, Ukraine, or also in the negotiation between, or in the conflict between Israel and Hamas, Switzerland is not respected as a mediator anymore, and this is highly critical for Switzerland to be a mediator in such an important and very difficult conflict. So mediation means someone else, a third party, is stepping in, neutral, no own interest. They are trying to find a new room between the parties. If it doesn't work, we end up in war. I'm sure you have read about Machiavelli. The question is war, is it an element of a negotiation? Is it an element to bring negotiation parties back to the table? Has it nothing to do with a negotiation because it's the end of the negotiation process? That's a very important question. Is war really an element of a negotiation or not? From a negotiation perspective, from a de-escalation perspective, there is one element which you need to know. So let's say you're in this deadlock position. You have exchanged all the options, all ideas, and now there's this window of opportunity, and there might be an option to find a new way out of this conflict. So the problem is, as you can imagine, someone will lose his or her faith because they stated their demand at the beginning, they stated their position. So what we did as a police negotiator, very often had to negotiate with someone who was about to commit suicide. You know, these people, they're, let's say, standing at the high building, showing the world, I'm ready to jump, I'm ready to die. A lot of people are waiting. Everyone is with a smartphone, they take pictures, they take videos. If it takes too long, they start to scream, like, jump. And, you know, these guys, they're standing there on a high building, and they don't want to jump, they don't want to die. So as a police negotiator, you talk to them, and then you get the feeling, no, they're not ready, they're not prepared to die. So what we did as a police negotiator, we offered them the way out of this deadlock position. We offered them a firefighter uniform. So we told them, okay, if you come inside, if you join us inside the building, you will get a firefighter uniform. We will dress you like a firefighter. You will go downstairs looking like a firefighter. You can go through the crowd looking like a firefighter. So you do have an option to leave the situation and saving your face. So what you need to do at the end of the negotiation, what you need to do in this window of opportunity to de-escalate the situation. Number one, if possible, think about it. What did we wrong? What information did we miss? Try to find what went wrong. Maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you stated your demand. Maybe you came up with the threat. So the question is always, you need to rethink your position. what is wrong right now. Try to find common interest. Keep in mind the negotiators, they are not able to talk about common interest anymore because they are so involved. They are in the tunnel vision. They don't find a new way out of the deadlock. This is why you need always a commander. The commander, they can talk to each other. They can talk about the framework. They can talk about common interest, and they can restart the negotiation. You need a commander in every negotiation. And at the end of a negotiation, you need to make sure that your negotiation partner, that they can save their face. So how to do it? You need to ask for more at the beginning. You need to come up with more demands at the beginning, because at the end of a negotiation, you have to give something to make sure that your opponent party, they can use this to their win, because they need to justify their decision internally to their board, to their C-level, to whatever stakeholders behind them. So you need to ask for more at the beginning, because you need something at the end, which you could communicate as a firefighter uniform. You need to make sure that the other party can save his or her face. And I'm on time, so exactly half an hour. And Beth, now we can step into the Q&A session, and
Okay.
we can talk about all the questions you might have.
Yeah. So it's funny you were mentioning, I mean, not funny, but the steps, but when you got to step 5, actions instead of words, I remember clearly I had a client. There were 2 organizations that needed to create an MOU together because they were funded by a third organization. And there were complaints, but one organization didn't take it seriously. But as soon as she put the complaint in writing, then he just like blew up, because then he
Yeah, yeah,
saw it. And then it registered a whole other level of
yeah, yeah,
escalation.
yeah. It's amazing. It's just, a very brief WhatsApp, just 3 words, pain. Unbelievable, unbelievable.
Yeah. So the one other thing I wanted to say before we open it up to questions, you talk about losing face. And I remember that there are concepts also about managing face, which is what you're doing there. Like you're saving face and managing face, or giving face, because by
Mm,
dressing them as the firefighter, then you're providing a way out, right? So the
mm,
whole idea about face, and I lived in Japan many years, and people say, well, it's a very Asian cultural kind of a thing, but I think face is around the world. I think every culture has some kind of face saving or face giving, because there are different things that embarrass people, and you have to provide a way out regardless, I think, of the cultural orientation.
yeah, that's very interesting, because I think there's a difference between saving face and giving face. I think in the American culture, or in the Swiss culture, we think it's enough to save face, to make sure the other one will not be destroyed. From my understanding, in Japan, it's more about giving face. So you do in a very proactive way
Yeah.
something that the other one can really feel like a winner.
Yeah.
So from an American or Swiss perspective, it's if you don't destroy the other one, that's fine. in in Japan, or in other cultures like Arab countries, you have to do more in a more
Yeah.
proactive way. You have to give face instead just save the face.
Yeah.
Uh, which we don't understand in our culture, because we think that I've done everything.
Well, you haven't
Only.
done everything right. You've done some. I know. So that's why I like to think about making the other person a hero. Like, how can I
Yeah,
save the face and make that, or give face and make that person a hero so they come out looking
exactly.
good?
We call it, we write the victory speech for them.
Yeah.
So we always try to find out. So what I do in my negotiations, I always ask my clients, for example. So let's assume we will reach an agreement with A, B, and C. What critical questions do you expect internally? What questions might come up if you present this result to the board? And for these concerns, I write the victory speech, because very often they are not aware, or they don't know how to do it. So I need to help them to write their victory speech. Otherwise, if they don't have a victory speech internally, then they have to come back to the negotiation table. And this is
Interesting.
what I have learned. If there is a so-called renegotiation, so if you think you do have an agreement, and the other party will come back to the negotiation table by, well, I didn't get an internal approval, then you made a mistake. Then you didn't write a victory speech for them. So they were not able to negotiate internally because you didn't provide the necessary information. And this is why it's not just you need to save their face, you need, in addition, to give face in writing the victory speech for them. And to
Yeah.
do this, you need to ask them, so what critical questions do you expect? And this is very often a big surprise because it's different to what you believe and what you think.
Interesting. So almost like I think about like a full service provider, right? So you're not only
Yeah,
doing the
exactly.
negotiation, you're helping them bring the results of the negotiation back in and make them look like a hero. That's great. So
I love full service provider.
full
That's
service,
excellent. I like
like
it.
the white glove treatment, you know? There
Okay.
you go. Well, it is interesting because sometimes people can't translate the victory back
Mhm.
internally, and in some cases, internal negotiations are fiercer than even external
Yeah,
negotiations.
yeah.
Okay, so one of our guests asks the participants, how do you handle those that lack empathy? And this is some kind of question I get a lot because I know people say, well, if I do this, but if they don't reciprocate, then what
Mhm,
happens? So,
mhm.
what happens for people who lack empathy?
Well, from my perspective, as a former hostage negotiator, my background is completely different. Huh? Okay, I have to say it. I never believe in what people are telling me.
Oh,
Never, because I have learned as a police officer and police negotiator, um, I can't trust the information. So what I know it sounds a little bit scary and just, but this is what I do. I never take notes about what people are telling me. I always take notes about what they don't tell me,
mm,
which is completely different approach. So, so if if you tell me, for example, I need 10% price increase, otherwise I will. Yeah? I don't take notes about 10%, and I don't take notes about otherwise. I take notes about he or she is still here. That's fine. So I always try to find out what's going on here. And if I would listen to the words, then I would move the direction in the wrong direction. So let's say, Beth, you're telling me I need plus 10%. If I write down 10%, then I have to say, Beth, it's not possible, 10%. And then you say, but this is what you need. And then it's deadlock immediately.
hmm.
And this is why I never take notes about what people are telling me. I only take notes about what they don't tell me. And then it's a completely different approach. You see a different picture. And, um, and then you ask from a different perspective. So let's say, if I take notes about 10%, then I would ask you, Beth, why 10%? And then we talk about 10%, but this is not what I want to talk about. If I take notes about why are you still here, then it's different. And so a lack of empathy, it's very often that I ask the wrong questions or that I focus on what people are telling me, which is not important. It's always important what's not visible, what's invisible. This is important in a negotiation.
That's interesting too, because there's always missing information. There's always
Always,
more than what we are
always,
presented with.
exactly.
Good,
Yeah.
good tip. Okay, we have quite a few questions. I don't think we're going to get to everything, but it's a lot of participation.
That's
Okay,
good.
so we could see all 10 steps of escalation in many undergoing conflicts. For example, Ukraine, Russia. You said that the window of opportunity is between number 9 and 10, and that escalation is possible only there. But if smart politicians know this process, they should not be able to start de-escalation in any steps, or even better, not start escalation at all. So if they knew your model, would they still escalate?
Yes. Because their their target is different. So the question is always if there is, let's say, Russia, Ukraine. From if you would talk to Mr. Putin, then his perspective is that he is right from his perspective. maybe we think or you think, no, it's different. I have a different perspective. Well, however, from his perspective, he believes he's right. I'm sure he found a lot of internal supporters for his position. I'm sure he is in a bubble with only yes men supporting him. And his target is obviously to win the war, not to de-escalate. Yeah, so we support a lot of politicians, and very often they are not that smart from a negotiation perspective. So they don't think it through to the last really important escalation step for the ultimate consequences, and then they are surprised. And because politicians, they negotiate almost always in two directions. They negotiate the negotiation table and to the public. And this is why the question is always, what is the main interest? To reach an agreement at the negotiation table, or to use the negotiation to the public to create some reputation, or to show the world what I'm doing here. And if you're a politician, then you have to include the public in all the negotiations you do. And this is why it's difficult to negotiate in politics. And yeah, it's really interesting, because there are so many, as you know, Middle East, Near East, there's so many stakeholders, so many different interests, so many, and the past is so visible, because in other cultures you could say, well, in other contexts you could say, well, let's forget about the past, let's negotiate for the future. But in a negotiation like in Israel, Hamas, there's a lot of history involved, and of course the public is observing and monitoring the negotiation. So it's not easy, and this is why there is no negotiation going on, because right now it's too complex, too complicated.
Yeah. So would back channel negotiations be more effective in that situation for part of it?
The only way. Yeah. So I know there are a lot of back channel negotiations going on. The question is always, which is the right, or who could be the right mediator? As I mentioned before, Switzerland, we lost a little bit of reputation as a mediator, and especially in this conflict in Near East, as you know, Qatar stepped in, Egypt stepped in, Saudi stepped in. So China tried to solve this conflict, Turkey. So we have different players, and from my perspective, they have their own interest in this negotiation, and this is why, from my perspective, they are not mediators; they are negotiators for their interests, and this is why it didn't work so far.
Right, because they have their own interest there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to summarize the next question because it's a little bit long, but it's also talking about negotiating with bad actors, or good faith or bad faith. I know a lot of times people say you're not negotiating a good faith, or they're not negotiating a good faith, or they're bad actors. So how does a negotiation work when you're dealing with bad actors?
I don't care. I don't care.
You don't care?
No, because
Why?
for me, it doesn't make a difference. So I don't expect good faith in a negotiation.
Okay.
I don't expect it. Not because the other party is not smart enough, or it's really ugly. It's more like they have their own interest, and for whatever reason, they believe they are right with their perspective. And then I might think it's unfair, or it's in bad faith. But from my perspective, there is no bad faith. What I never do, I never mention the word fair or fairness in a negotiation, because what is fairness? What does it mean? Is it fair to offer cooperation? Is it unfair not to offer cooperation? So what I do, but I know it's very unique. If you in a negotiation, and if you're disappointed about your negotiation partner, then you made a mistake. Because you came up with some expectations. And for example, an expectation that they need to be fair. And then from your perspective, they behave in an unfair way, and then you're disappointed. So if you're disappointed, then it's your fault, not their fault, because you started with the wrong expectation. So, and if you negotiate, let's say with your background in Japan, they might have a different expectation on fairness or on long term. So if you ask an American what is long term, might be different to if you ask someone from Japan what is long term. So what is fair? And so what I do, but this is my approach. I know it sounds a little bit, very. It's not the usual approach. I don't have expectations, so I can't be disappointed. If you have a lot of expectation on fairness, on justice, on cooperation, then you're always disappointed. And if you don't have expectations, it's easier to negotiate. And this is what I do. I don't have expectations on all these topics. I think they have their own interest. I have my interest, and let's negotiate. Let's solve a conflict. And from my perspective, the target of a negotiation is not to convince my negotiation partner that they have to understand that I am right and they are wrong. From my perspective, it's not to convince them. It's to solve the conflict, which is completely different approach. Because if I try to convince my negotiation partner, then I have to come up with arguments. If I come up with an argument, I will receive a counter argument. And then we are moving in the wrong direction. So I'm not interested in arguments. I never use an argument in a negotiation. So what I do, I come up with a demand. So here's what I want. Tell me what you want. And then we can find common ground, and then we can reach an agreement. And maybe it's very unusual. However, that's the best way in this de-escalation scenario, not thinking about I am right and they have to understand that they are wrong. It's more like, okay, they do have their position, I have my position, let's figure out what we can do.
Yeah, because just staying in that space of being right is not going to advance you.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about, there's a question here from one of my students too. You talk about decision makers, and you talk about the negotiator, and you talk about the commander. So you didn't mention, but I know in previous conversations you say the decision maker should not be in the room, should be separate. So what's the relationship between the commander and the negotiator? And is it important to have some certain kind of preparation beforehand between the commander and the negotiator?
Of course. Okay. That's a very good question. Yes, of course. So first step is the CEO, for example, in a company environment, CEO, decision maker, is they need to define the license to negotiate. So what would be brilliant, what would be the best outcome, and what is our walkaway position? Let's say we want 10% price increase, at least we need 3% to be profitable, let's say. And then the decision maker is handing over the license to negotiate to the negotiation team, to the commander and the negotiator. Say, okay, do whatever you want to do. At the end of this negotiation, we need minimum 3%, 10% would be great. We need a maximum target, 10%, to develop this play to win mindset. Because if they only say 3%, then they end up with 3%. If they say 10% would be great, then they come up with this play to win mindset. So this is the license to negotiate. Very, very important. It's a license to negotiate. You hand over the license plus responsibility. If, very important, and this is a huge mistake, if the negotiation team, if they walk away with 2%, then it's not a failure, it's a decision. Because in most companies, they say, okay, we failed. No. It's not a failure. It's a decision to say, okay, we don't agree on a partnership below 3%. So very important. So the commander and the negotiator, they need to prepare the negotiation from two different perspectives. The negotiator, they need to be prepared from a content perspective. So they need to know all the Excel sheets. They need to know the numbers, the volume, legal terms, all that stuff. The commander needs to prepare the negotiation from a strategic perspective. So strategy means, should we start with high demands? Should we offer cooperation at the beginning? Should we avoid the conflict for one day? Should we play upon time? Should we offer cooperation? So this is a strategic decision. And this is why you can't do both. You can't be a good negotiator and a good commander. What we always try to find in our consulting business, we try to analyze our client's team and to say, okay, you are a better negotiator and you're a better commander. Because as a negotiator, um, you have good analytical skills. You're very focused on numbers and on details. As a commander, you need to be a good observer. You need to be able to read between the lines, which is a completely different setup. And so they need to be prepared. And in the negotiation, at the beginning, the commander is telling us, thank you so much for joining this meeting, common interests, long term. And then the negotiator starts. And from this second on, the commander is observing the negotiation, just sitting there, listening to the conversation, reading between the lines. And because what we have seen very often, that the negotiator is so focused on the number that they don't see that the other party is opening the door. Yeah? And as a commander, you need to see it. And this is, it's from our police background. And this is what I don't understand, to be honest. At the police, at law enforcement, at the FBI, you do everyday difficult negotiations, everyday crisis negotiations. We have a lot of experience. And I was really surprised that business and politics, that they don't use this experience. And this is what we do with our institute. We try to translate the experience and knowledge from law enforcement, from crisis negotiation to business and politics.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to skip around here a little bit. So, in which situation are you willingly escalating a situation to reach an agreement? How do you recognize that this move is necessary? Is it?
I would say 99% I try to escalate, because so very important to make sure there are two different elements here. Number one is the strategy, and the other one is the tone. Don't mix it up. So escalation means I try to escalate because I come up with more demands, higher demands. I ask for more. This is an escalation. The tone is always very polite, always respectful. You will never destroy a negotiation because of a high demand, but you can destroy a negotiation easily if you communicate in a disrespectful way. So if you want to play hardball, if you want to escalate, you need to be very, very, very respectful. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So then you're very respectful, very friendly, charming, and then you ask for more. We call it, we put the fish on the table, so we say what we want. And because if you escalate, if you come up with higher demands, then you force the other party to come up with their demands. And then maybe they say, well, that's not possible, but we could talk about A, B, and C. And then you force them to come up with other options. And this is why it's very often important to escalate the negotiation a little bit to create this momentum. Keep in mind, you need to be very respectful. If you one word can destroy everything. One WhatsApp can destroy everything. So you need to be very, very careful.
I've heard you say that before about always being respectful.
So important.
Okay, here's a little bit of a different question here. What do you think are the three top principles that could apply in negotiating and de-escalating conflict within a family business?
That's very interesting. Well, in family business, it's all about emotions. It's all about being disappointed. It's all about expectations. I think in family business, if possible. So the question is family business and family with my kids, for example, or is it with selling my company to another family? So it's
I think they mean within the same family, probably.
in the same family. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so here's what I do. Yeah. Um, I'm a father of 4 kids, and if my daughter is asking me, for example, Daddy, can I get the new iPhone 16? Then I don't say yes. I don't say no. I say, okay, thank you for stating your demand. What about Sunday between 10 and 11? So you can prepare yourself. I will be prepared, and then we talk about the new iPhone. Yeah. So you need to set the framework before you talk about the content, because if I react emotionally, what we do very often in the family business, then I destroy the negotiation completely. So my daughter is asking me for the new iPhone 16. I say, no, you're out of your mind. Paying. Yeah? Then the relationship is destroyed before talking about all the options. So number one, from my perspective, is you need to set the framework. So let's say Sunday from 10 to 11. Number two, you need to analyze yourself. Why are you so emotionally attached? What is it? Why are you so angry about this demand? Because she got the iPhone 14. Why does she need the new 16? What is it? What's going on in my mind? What is the reason why I'm so affected? That's number two. So analyze yourself. And number three, always keep in mind you cannot walk away. You cannot walk away from your parents or from your kids. So it's always long term. So don't destroy it. Be respectful. So respectful means um, you need to see the other side. Doesn't mean you have to like the other side. Doesn't mean that you have to respect the other side's perspective. But you have to see them to say, okay, well, she's asking me for the new iPhone. It doesn't mean she's in bad faith. It doesn't mean she's so it's just see her. And so number one, framework. Number two, analyze yourself. And number three, be very respectful. To give them a room to. So it's a practical example. If my daughter is asking me for a new iPhone 16, it's okay. Tell me more. Tell me more. Yeah. Um, Tell me more. What is the reason for the new iPhone? So give them some room. This is, from my perspective, respectful communication.
Yeah, good. So now your daughter must have a tough time negotiating with you, unless she's learned your techniques. Then you have a
Yes,
tough time.
I do have a tough time. That's for sure.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Could you share your thoughts on how to handle leaks of information that may happen during negotiations, like example, like the media, between back channels of opposing sides, and so on?
Yeah.
That happens.
So that happens a lot. What we do at the beginning of a negotiation, everyone is involved. Everyone will get some information. In a company, for example, you have 80% of your information or of your reporting is internal and 20% to the other side. So we do, for example, set up a LinkedIn community where everyone can have a look at the status quo for the negotiation. We do weekly updates internally to say, okay, this is what we do right now in the negotiation. So we do it in a very proactive way to share information. On the other side, if you're focusing or if you're reaching the final phase of a negotiation, only 3 managers are involved in the core team: decision maker, commander, negotiator. What we don't do, we don't save information on the internal server,
Mm.
because there's always someone who has access to the information. So we only take notes on our note on paper. Yeah? We don't send emails because there's always someone who has access to emails. So in this critical phase of a negotiation, we only meet, I know it sounds a little bit unusual, we only meet in crowded restaurants for the final negotiation.
Okay.
Because in a restaurant, if it's really crowded and loud, then you can discuss the sensitive details, and no one can listen to it and can observe it. But this is only for the last and final negotiation. We do the last briefing in a crowded restaurant. We don't save it on the server. We don't take notes. We don't send emails.
Wow. Very specific.
It is.
Well, we are at the end of our time together. It's been wonderful, always a wonderful, rich conversation. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the other questions, but thank you everybody for participating. We had quite a good turnout. This link will be available in a little while. Kirsten may put some information in the chat about that. So Matthias, thank you so much. And we'll be seeing you soon, I hope.